Right. So, in the last week, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian travelled to Yerevan, the Armenian capital, where he signed 10 wide ranging cooperation agreements with Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. Days later, Tehran also finalised an ambitious agricultural trade package with Pakistan, setting the goal of $3 billion in annual exchanges, with Islamabad to supply up to 60% of Iran's imported meat. Now, these agreements may appear to be dull, technical events, the boring politics of everyday normal life. But actually, there's something else going on here. At the very moment when Washington, in deepening its ties to Armenia and Pakistan, believed it was successfully isolating Iran from its neighbours, Tehran was actually deepening ties with two of them, and two that the US was, of course, recently involved in negotiations in at that. So, for all of the pro-Israel influence the Trump administration might believe it has, it might not be as strong as they thought. Right, so the United States, under Donald Trump's second presidency, has revived and sharpened a long-standing policy of isolating the Islamic Republic. Its aim is to weaken Tehran's capacity to project power by hemming it in diplomatically, economically, and militarily, especially after the damage it wrought on Israel back in June. In the Caucasus, Trump's administration brokered that new corridor agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan that I covered the other day, designed to secure Israel's oil supply line from the Caspian and to deny Iran leverage over Yerevan. In Pakistan, Trump sought to reforge ties by designating Baloch militant groups as terrorist organisations, Balochistan lying pretty much on the border between Pakistan and Iran as it does, flattering Islamabad's counter-terrorism record while he was doing it, and proclaiming a new era of partnership. With Assad toppled in Syria last year, the land corridor connecting Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon appeared broken. In the Gulf, US alliances with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Kuwait seemed to provide a southern wall of containment, while Jordan remained a reliable partner, as always, for both Washington and Tel Aviv. So, on paper, this encirclement strategy looked pretty formidable, looked to be taking shape, therefore. Iran appears boxed in, its northern flank compromised by this new Caucasus corridor between Armenia and Azerbaijan, its eastern border tilted towards Washington through Pakistan, its western arc fractured by Assad's fall, and its southern Gulf neighbours looking into US security guarantees. The White House presents this as a geopolitical success story now, therefore, proof that Trump's transactional diplomacy has delivered where previous administrations faltered. That is how to beat Iran, in effect, they are telling us. And yet, the reality on the ground is very different from Trumpian claims, not that that necessarily surprises you. Encirclement is not translated into containment of Iran at all. Far from being abandoned, Iran's been strengthening relations with Armenia and Pakistan. Iraq remains firmly within Tehran's sphere of influence, no matter how many unwanted US bases remain there, and how much Trump might think Iraq are on his side. In Lebanon and in Yemen, allies continue to exert pressure on Israel. And in Syria, instability creates new openings for Iranian manoeuvre, even as Assad's departure was hailed as a US victory. The actions of the al-Qaeda terrorist turned unelected President al-Jilani in Syria, as pro-Israel and pro-US as he is, his own attacks on minorities have played into the hands of those disgusted by such things, and a destabilised Syria post-Assad suits Iran more than an effectively run pro-Israel one does. Moreover, the more Washington squeezes, the more Tehran turns eastward towards the likes of China or Russia, embedding itself in alternative global networks such as BRICS, where it is now a member, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. Iran is anything but isolated. It is instead adapting, proving far more resilient than Washington's designs would suggest, would like you to believe. So to understand the current dynamic, therefore, it's important to situate Trump's encirclement strategy and what he's telling us all in a historical perspective, because this idea of isolating Iran predates him. He's only resurrecting an idea that's been tried many times before. Since the 1979 revolution in Iran, when the West lost their puppet leader, the Shah, and therefore control of Iran at all, the United States has sought to contain the Islamic Republic through sanctions and diplomatic pressure and military bases elsewhere in the region, and other regional alliances at the same time. During the 1980s, Washington supported Iraq in its war against Iran. In the 1990s, the Clinton administration spoke of dual containment of Iran and Iraq. Under George W. Bush, Iran was labelled part of the axis of evil. Barack Obama's approach shifted towards diplomacy with the 2015 nuclear deal, but even then the US presence in the Gulf and its support for Israel served as a check on Tehran. Trump's first presidency marked a return to maximum pressure with the withdrawal from the Obama-era JCPOA in 2018 and the imposition of crippling sanctions. His second presidency, therefore, has gone further still, reviving the language of encirclement yet again. The rationale in his head is fairly straightforward. It would have to be. It's in Trump's head, after all. Iran is perceived as the greatest threat to US and Israeli interests in the region. By building a ring of hostile or compliant states around its borders, Washington believes it can weaken Tehran's economy, limit its political influence, and constrain its military options. In Trump's rhetoric, this strategy represents not only a containment of Iran, but a rolling back of its influence as well, dismantling the so-called axis of resistance, as it now gets called, that stretches from Tehran to Baghdad, formerly to Damascus as well, but then also onto Beirut and also Sana'a in Yemen. The Caucasus Corridor, the Zangezur corridor, brokered by Trump earlier this month, was presented as a strategic masterstroke in line with this encirclement strategy. By integrating Armenia into a US monitoring route, or a US monitored route with Azerbaijan on the Iranian border almost as it sits, the administration claimed to secure Israel's oil supplies from Baku while undermining Tehran's long-standing partnership with Yerevan. In Pakistan, Trump's designation of Baloch militant groups as terrorists and his praise for Islamabad's counter-terrorism record were cast as a pivot away from Iran and towards US alignment. The fall of Assad, meanwhile, was hailed as the death knell of Iran's land corridor to Hezbollah in Lebanon. In the Gulf, alliances remained solid. From Washington's vantage point, the encirclement was nearly complete. They love it when a plan comes together. Here's a very simplified image to illustrate all of this. Trump has been forging anti-Iranian ties with Armenia and Azerbaijan there, right at the top. There's a small gap between Azerbaijan and Armenia you should be able to spot, hopefully there, right on the border with Iran, Zangezur, which separates Azerbaijan from its exclave province, its unattached province of Nakhchivan, which required going through Iran to reach. No longer going to be the case with the US-controlled corridor, of course, right on Iran's northern border, no less. US troops potentially securing that right on Iran's northern border, practically. Turkey is westernized and facilitating oil transfer to Israel. Iraq is an ally, but the US basically thinks otherwise because of their presence there. Pakistan have also touched on Trump's butt-kissing exercise there, playing on historic tensions between Pakistan and Iran. The main reason for punching up this map is to touch on the two other states that border Iran, which have not been mentioned in this video yet. Afghanistan, which of course has fallen to the Taliban since the West abandoned it after 20 years of warfare, is a no-go for Iran as well, since they possibly like the repressive Taliban even less than we do in the West. As for Turkmenistan, it's played down in the media, but as a staunch ally to Russia, it is not exactly anti-Iran either, Iran actually being their largest trade partner outside of Russia. In and of itself, though, that's not going to float Iran's economy, so the idea is by hitting everyone else around Iran, enough economic damage is being done to them. Of course, Iran having a massive controlling interest in the Persian Gulf means isolation by land, no matter how extensive, still gives Iran plenty of options by sea. Encirclement is not the same as containment, you see. States are not chess pieces that can be moved into static positions. They have interests, vulnerabilities, and constraints that compel them to hedge and to balance. This becomes clear when examining the northern and eastern flanks of Iran's neighbourhood here. Armenia should have been the poster child of Washington's success. For decades, Yerevan relied on Iran for energy and transit, especially as its borders with Turkey and Azerbaijan were effectively closed to them. By bringing Armenia into a new corridor with Azerbaijan, the United States hoped to cut off this dependency and pull Yerevan into the Western orbit. Yet Armenia's behaviour since has shown this not to be the case. You see, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian visited Yerevan right after Trump left and signed 10 memoranda of understanding with Prime Minister Pashinyan while he was there. These agreements covered economic cooperation, transport infrastructure, cultural and educational exchanges, energy projects and health. So far from cooling ties, the two states demonstrated a willingness to broaden them across multiple domains. At the same summit, Pashinyan gave reassurances to Tehran that any transit routes through Armenian territory would remain under full Armenian sovereignty and security control, explicitly ruling out the presence of foreign, meaning US or Israeli, security contractors. That's in direct contradiction to what we've been told previously about this corridor, that because it was being leased by the US would be securing it. Perhaps Armenia is now saying, no, that's not going to be the case. This was a direct rebuke to any attempt to internationalize Armenia's borders in a way that might be hostile to Iran, therefore. Armenia's motivations are clear. Its geography leaves it little choice. It was the lack of choice that Trump saw as his advantage in his dealings with them, but it's proven not to be the case at all. Landlocked and encircled by hostile neighbours, Yerevan depends on Iran for access to global markets and for energy security. Iranian gas and electricity continue to be vital to the Armenian economy. The Tehran Times reported that bilateral trade had already reached nearly $1 billion in 2024, a figure the new agreements are designed to expand even further. In April of this year, Reuters reported that Armenia and Iran had even conducted joint military drills, underscoring a security relationship that's going to endure despite the best US efforts to undermine it. Thus, rather than flipping into Washington's camp, Armenia is hedging. They don't have a lot of options to do anything else. They took a US offer because economically they couldn't afford to say no to it, but it hasn't ended their relationship with Iran, and the US are not to set up shop anywhere but the corridor they have leased. And even that now, according to these latest comments made by Armenia, is under question as well. It engages with US-backed projects to secure diplomatic goodwill, but it deepens ties with Tehran to secure economic survival. And this is precisely the kind of nuance US policymakers overlook. The result is that the encirclement map drawn in Washington fails to reflect the lived realities of Armenian choices. If Armenia complicates the northern flank, though, Pakistan complicates the east too. For Trump, the designation of Baloch-armed groups as terrorists was a bit of a coup for him. Earlier this month, the US State Department formally added the Balochistan Liberation Army and related groups to its list of foreign terrorist organisations. And this was all framed as a move to strengthen counter-terrorism cooperation with Islamabad, which Washington praised as a success story days later during a joint dialogue. Trump himself lauded Pakistan's efforts, presenting it as proof that US-Pakistani relations were back on track after years of mistrust. And yet this move contained, a certain Israel-shaped irony, let's put it. For both Tehran and Islamabad, the Baloch insurgency has long been seen as an externally manipulated conflict. These terrorists, as they are now being designated are seen as proxies of Israel, and sometimes India, accused of backing militant groups to destabilise Iran's Sistan Balochistan province and Pakistan's own Balochistan region, the areas where the two nations actually meet. The Cradle reported that the insurgency was widely regarded as a front in Israel's covert war against Iran, designed to disrupt not only Iranian stability, but also Pakistan's Gwadar port and the China-Pakistan economic corridor. By prescribing the Baloch groups, Washington inadvertently validated Iran's narrative, even as it sought to box Tehran in. Great job, guys. At the same time, Iran was itself reaching out to Pakistan with offers of humanitarian assistance. After monsoon floods have killed over 300 people in Pakistan this month, President Pezeshkian sent his condolences and pledged Iranian aid to help. The Iranian Red Crescent declared itself ready to dispatch emergency medical teams and relief supplies. Press TV and Tasnim News both reported Tehran's willingness to provide direct support to affected communities. Even more significant was the expansion of agricultural trade. Just last week, Iran and Pakistan signed agreements to double their agricultural trade to $3 billion annually. Pakistan agreed to supply 60% of Iran's imported meat, as well as rice, corn and maize. Iran in turn would increase its exports of dairy products, nuts and fruit. Cold chain infrastructure and customs streamlining were promised to make this trade sustainable. Pezeshkian's official visit to Islamabad earlier this month further consolidated those relations. Alongside Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, he signed 12 agreements spanning energy, trade, culture and security cooperation, very similar to what he's been signing in Armenia, in fact. Both sides spoke of transforming their long-troubled border into a zone of opportunity rather than tension. The Institute for National Security Studies described this as a strategic pivot, a recognition by both states that their futures were interlinked. Iran's role in mediating India-Pakistan tensions earlier this year also reinforced this perception. Back in May, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi travelled to Islamabad to urge de-escalation after the deadly attack in Kashmir, the clash between Pakistan and India that happened at that point, underscoring Tehran's aspiration to be a stabilising force in South Asia as well. Thus, Pakistan is also hedging rather than aligning. It accepts US designations and praise, but it simultaneously embraces Iranian aid, trade and diplomacy. Trump may boast of flipping Islamabad in the West's favour, but in reality, Pakistan is binding itself closer to Tehran out of necessity. The fall of Bashar al-Assad in December of last year was celebrated in Washington as a decisive blow to Iran. For all of the very justifiable reasons to dislike Assad, the long-standing Syrian leader had been Tehran's most reliable Arab ally, the linchpin of its land corridor to Hezbollah in Lebanon. When Ahmed al-Shara, as the terrorist al-Jilani now prefers to call himself, was installed as transitional president in January, and an interim constitution followed in March, many US officials proclaimed that the axis of resistance had been cut apart. Quiet talks between Syrian and Israeli representatives in Paris were cited as proof that Damascus was slipping out of Tehran's orbit with the corridor broken. Yet this interpretation closes that particular loop too early as well. Syria's transition from Assad to al-Jilani has not brought stability, it's brought absolute chaos. The UN envoy warned in February that the ceasefire was tenuous, and by this month, the new government has been struggling with spiralling crises. Attacks on minorities that they've been conducting for months that have left many observers wondering if things have actually improved for Syria or worsened. Israel constantly invading the south despite al-Jilani wanting relations with them. A plan to redenominate the Syrian currency by dropping 2 zeros. Seizure of 200 million Captagon pills as Damascus tried to dismantle Assad's narco-state legacy. And a historic drought that left millions facing wheat shortages and hunger. The Druze minority erupted in protest, of course, with some factions reportedly seeking Israeli support against militia crackdowns, al-Jilani's militias. Al-Jilani's war on minorities is religious extremism, as he is, a whole host of developments that underscore the fragility of the new Syrian order rather than its resilience. And so for Iran, the instability is not a barrier but an opening. It's precisely in fractured states that this sort of influence, Tehran's methods of influence, cultivating militias and providing subsidized fuel or food and embedding cultural ties and inserting advisors, this is where they proved most effective in the past. Assad's fall has disrupted their neat little corridor, but it has not eliminated Iran's capacity to project power. Instead, it's created a more chaotic environment in which Tehran could once again reassert leverage under the cover of all of this disorder. Certainly the chaos does nothing to hinder Iran. So what looked like a US victory, therefore, risks backfiring on multiple fronts here. By celebrating Assad's ouster at the end of Iran's reach in the Levant, Washington has overlooked the fact that fragile states often provide Tehran with the very conditions it thrives in. Rather than a closed corridor, Syria has become a contested vacuum. Across the Gulf, US alliances remain strong, obviously. It's always strong there, isn't it? Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, they're firmly entrenched in Washington's security umbrella. And yet even here, the cracks exist. Qatar maintains warm ties with Tehran, sharing the South Pars gas field. Oman continues its historic role as a mediator, balancing relations with all sides. Encirclement here is far less than total. Chinese involvement has opened dialogues between Iran and the likes of Saudi Arabia. And of course, China is a big customer of Iranian oil, helping to support their economy that way too. And besides, Iran have their own access to the Persian Gulf anyway. They are themselves a Gulf state. More importantly, Iran's power is not limited to state-to-state relations. In Iraq, Tehran retains immense influence through Shia political parties and militias such as the PMU. Despite the presence of US troops there, Baghdad's politics remain shaped by Iranian networks. In Lebanon, Hezbollah continues to function despite attempts by the Lebanese government itself to now disarm them while still being under attack by Israel. In Yemen, the Houthis remain defiant, launching attacks on Israeli targets such as Ben Gurion Airport and blockading that Red Sea shipping. These allies, this sea access means that even if Iran were surrounded by land, it still wouldn't be contained. Washington may present Iran as encircled. It might make for a good front page, but containment remains a pipe dream. It's impossible to achieve. Armenia continues to hedge, deepening economic and security ties with Tehran. Pakistan, far from aligning, is building structural interdependence with Iran through agriculture and aid. Syria remains unstable, with opportunities for Iran to reassert itself. The Gulf monarchies hedge too in places, and Iran's allies ensure enduring influence. And meanwhile, China and Russia stand ready to provide global backstops, embedding Tehran in alternative economic and security frameworks. Encirclement without containment is a very brittle strategy. It produces headlines in Washington, but fails to transform realities on the ground. It is an illusion just to secure some nice headlines for Trump in the right-wing media circus. Worse, it risks backfiring by driving Iran's neighbours into deeper cooperation with Tehran, precisely because of US overreach and dishonesty, and it makes them wary of any dependence on Washington. The attempt to isolate Iran actually illustrates the limits of US power in the multipolar world we actually now live in. Encirclement may appear neat on a map, nice and tidy, looks good, makes for a nice narrative, but states hedge and they balance and they pursue their own interests because every state does. Of course they do. Armenia cannot abandon Iran without jeopardizing its access to energy and trade. Pakistan cannot alienate Tehran without risking border instability and food insecurity. Syria remains fragile thanks to US and Israeli support for a terror group still designated as such by many Western nations, but whose leaders are happy to press the flesh with their Al-Qaeda leader. And most certainly, as it applies to the UK, support for Palestine can end up actually seeing you arrested these days. Iraq remains Iranian supporting, as do allies further afield like the Houthis. The Gulf monarchies hedge even as they host US bases. Thus Iran is not isolated at all, simply adapting, always adapting. By offering aid, expanding trade, leveraging asymmetric tools, it's turned encirclement into an opportunity for itself, an opportunity for resilience. The United States may believe it's boxing Tehran in, but in practice, just produced a strategy that looks like containment only on paper. Encirclement without containment risks not only failure, but strategic backfire, strengthening the very adversary it seeks to weaken. Speaking of being weakened, though, Israel is learning a thing or two about that at the moment, isn't it? Now being so desperate for troops, with reservists refusing to report for duty and the absolute failure to force the ultra-Orthodox population to roll over and engage in military service, and all as they make a big push into Gaza and Gaza City, Netanyahu is now desperately trying to recruit Jewish young people from abroad to fight to seize Gaza, and is failing miserably. Because why would anybody want to travel to Israel just to fight to keep him in his job? Him of all people. Get all the details of that story, which is an issue that can have significant bearing over Netanyahu's designs on Gaza and the West Bank, in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next feed. Cheers folks.